out of it. And I was all for that. That was very much my scene. And also, he told me he was an ex-member of the General Synod of the Church of England and a devout churchgoer. So I felt, you know, I was working with a man, or I could work with a man who was enthusiastic and moral. I worked for 6 months without a salary, but on the promise that I would get shares in Titiger in lieu. I was given these in March '93, and I received the shares at 15 pence, which I was very happy because, like, we're in a football park now, you know? I like to wear the jersey. I would wear the scarf if I was a St Mirren supporter.
But his loyalty to Mr Brearley was not rewarded. Colonel Reynolds' shares in Titiger slumped even further, becoming virtually worthless. But not before he had to pay £4,000 in tax for the privilege of having them.
When I started working for a salary, which was March '93, it wasn't paid on time. There was a lot of sort of footling around. And then in April 1994, Mr Brearley told me that the company had a very serious cash flow problem. This was Titiger, not Neudert. And that would I accept not being paid for a wee while? Well, I did accept not being paid for a wee while, 6 months, 8 months. And gradually things went from bad to worse.
Eventually, in 1996, he and the estate manager successfully sued Titiger for their unpaid salaries, but they still weren't paid for another year. The estate manager is still owed £50,000.
Basically, the check's in the post. Well, we get mail 3 times a week in Neudert, but it still hasn't arrived. Mr Brearley does not keep promises. He will sign anything, then you have to sue him. And it's very seldom that he parts with any money. I would never recommend anybody to have any dealings with him at all, and he certainly shouldn't be allowed north of the border.
Mr Brearley's solicitor told us Neudart Peninsula Limited was recently sold by Titiger plc, and Mr Brearley no longer has any connection with it. It was, however, sold with all of its assets and liabilities, which are now in the ownership of the purchasers, to be met in full by them. Meanwhile, in Paisley, the local consortium has had some bad news.
All I had to do last night was put our offer on the table, and I left the meeting. I got a phone call later on, about 9:30, from the managing director saying they had looked at both our offer and obviously thought about Mr Brearley's offer, but felt they still were in a situation that they had to go with Mr Brearley's offer.
But the club chairman told Frontline there was still all to play for. A final decision hadn't yet been reached. Mr Brearley has a long history in the English football world. Here too he's attracted controversy, no more so than at Sheffield United.
His main project was to make this ground into something called the Bramall Centre, which was quite ahead of its time. It was going to have, as well as an athletics track around the stadium, it was having a hotel, supermarket, community facilities, pubs, etc.
When Reg Brearley arrived here at Bramall Lane in the early 80s, Sheffield United were struggling in the lower English divisions. Under his chairmanship, the club began its ascent to the Premier Division. But many fans felt he was trying to run the club on a shoestring budget. And when the Blades were relegated in '94, the fans organised a campaign to oust him.
We were holding sort of mass demonstrations at the ground. We had a 10,000 strong red card demonstration. We held a ballot outside the ground of no confidence or not in Brearley, which was 98% against him. We handed out leaflets at every match. We did some silly things like we sent him 450 Christmas cards, which we delivered directly to his house in Lincolnshire.
Mr Brearley's grand plans for the club never came to fruition. The planning application for the Bramall Centre was turned down, so the income it promised never materialised. But the real crunch was when the team's best player was sold for £1 million.
We sold our star player, which was Brian Deane, at the behest of Reg Brearley. From that point on, it was, again, another downward spiral, and we ended up losing our Premiership place.
The club suffered further humiliation when one stand was demolished, but no money was available to rebuild it. So the stadium remained three-sided for 18 months. It was finally rebuilt after Mr Brearley left to become majority shareholder at Darlington, having sold his shares in Sheffield United. 3rd Division Darlington were the object of Mr Brealey's affections until last month, when he sold his majority shareholding after a 5-year relationship with the North East club. His supporters here point out that he led Darlington from the brink of bankruptcy to their first Wembley appearance in a playoff final. But others hold less happy memories of Mr Brealey.
We had a meeting at his house in Lincoln. He opened up a crate of champagne and explained what he wanted to do. He had this piece of land in Scotland with Knoydart, and it's all sorts of schemes, and on the face of it, present himself very well.
He was suggesting that there would be perhaps a tour of the Far East to his friend the Sultan of Brunei for the close season. He was suggesting that there would be some kind of link with players that perhaps weren't good enough for Sheffield United that may be good enough for Darlington, and he was suggesting that through his Knoydart estate there may be promising youngsters available to the football club that way. Certainly we never went to the Far East on a tour, and the other two never materialised either. We didn't have any real finance to buy players. We had to go on the free transfer market and beg, steal or borrow players on loan, basically. We bought one player, Matty Appleby from Newcastle, and we got a local businessman to put the money up.
So the money didn't come from Mr Brealey?
No, the money didn't come from Mr Brealey. It was a local businessman put the money up.
All right, he did come in and keep the club afloat for a while, but what happened to the money he made? Why didn't it come back into the club? We sold players. The start date for the new stadium was put back and put back and put back, and promises just never materialised. To be honest, they led us up the garden path.
Darlington still operate at a loss, but it seems like Mr Brealey left them in a better financial state. However, closer scrutiny of the club's accounts show that's mainly due to the manager's rather generous valuation of his squad at £2.25 million. The accounts also show that Mr Brealey's 82% shareholding in Darlington was held by an offshore trust registered in Gibraltar. Over the year 96 to 97, that trust charged the club £135,000 in management fees. Friday night and St Mirren sponsors are gathered in Renfrew for dinner, but it's been overshadowed by the lingering uncertainty regarding the club's future.
We've had no news today, we've had no news from the club, we've phoned the club a few times, and that's a bit disappointing that we've not been told one thing or another. But we're still here and we'll battle on.
Frontline has obtained confidential documents relating to Mr Brealey's bid for St Mirren. They show that as early as last month, the club's directors had agreed in principle to accept the offer which was made through Mr Brealey's company, Antrac Investments Limited. Antrac pledged to take responsibility for the club's £1 million bank overdraft and provide £600,000 worth of sponsorship over 3 years. But who exactly are Antrac Investments? According to Mr Brealey's correspondence with St Mirren, Antrac operates from an address here in Wellingborough near Lincoln. Frontline tried to contact Antrac by telephone and by fax, but neither number actually exists. In fact, directory inquiries could find no listing for the company anywhere in the country. So we came to track them down ourselves. But there's not much to see, because the property where Antrac is supposed to be based has actually been up for sale for 7 months.
We did enough diligence to satisfy us that if we put in place a legal document and put enough penalties in that legal document, then it would be sufficient for our purposes.
Did you, for example, check their phone numbers or their address?
I don't think I'm really here to talk about their phone numbers or their addresses. I'm really just saying that that is the situation.
Would you be surprised if I told you the phone numbers don't work and the address is for sale?
Well, I would not be surprised. If you say so, then you must be right.
Did you do any credit checks on Antrac at all?
We need not go into that because we are taking personal guarantees from Mr Brealey. And Mr Brealey has to substantiate that he is good for these guarantees before